And I just want to, so first of all, I'm going to introduce to you Simon Tuna, who is the curator here at Kew Gardens, and he is going to give you a quick intro and welcome you to Kew Gardens. So I'm going to pass over the mic to Simon.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I'm not going to say very much, but I did want to take this opportunity to just introduce myself and say hello, really. My name is Simon Tuma, and I began this role a couple of months ago, so I'm very much still finding my feet. And some of you will be aware that the curator of living collections role at Kew is one that hasn't been around for a while, but historically, or not that historically actually, it is a role that's been an established role in the past. So I'm really pleased that it's come back. And in a nutshell, you might say, what's he going to be doing? In a nutshell, it's really this. I don't know if any of you have read this is our living collections strategy. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm going to be doing for the next few years. It's quite thick. It's going to be quite a lot to do. Some of you are probably members of Plant Network, so you may have heard of me. Up until last summer, I was the chair of Plant Network, and then I passed that on. Around about the same time, actually, that I left the National Trust. So I worked for about 6 years in a national role as a plant conservation consultant within the National Trust. So I do know some of your gardens in this area, some of you too. So that's I'm not completely starting from square one. And before that, I was director and curator at Westonbirt Arboretum for quite a few years. So I've done a few things, but really I just want to say, over the next few years, I'm going to be looking for opportunities to work with you. So please do get in touch if you're doing exciting things and we can help and work together. So that would be really great. You've really picked a fantastic subject, and I'm really looking forward to sitting with you today and listening to it. So just finally, welcome. Thank you for coming, and welcome to Kew.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. And so I'm very happy to present our first speakers, Hamida Diriye and Tony Leach, and they are both from Parks for London. Hamida joined Parks for London from the mid-80s, where her role was focused on reducing the barriers faced by women and young people in accessing health services. She has over 3 years' experience in advocacy and community engagement, with a special interest in amplifying the voices of young people. The Young Person's Mental Health and Green Space Research Project examines the views of young people on green spaces, the social and cultural barriers faced in accessing green spaces, and the perceived impact on mental health and well-being. And Tony Leach, Tony has a background in horticulture, landscape, architecture and business development, and he brings over 40 years experience of working in London's public and voluntary green space sector. He's keen to see more young people entering the horticultural profession, so please give them a warm welcome, and they are beginning.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, right. I can't hear myself. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and what better place to be than Kew for all of us who I'm sure we're real plant lovers. And I was just telling Hamida on the way here that I'm old enough to remember coming to Kew as a kid, coming through the turnstile using an old penny, which is a big coin. It's a bit more expensive these days, so I'm going to make as much use as I can of my time here today to have a quick look around. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about who we are, Parks for London. If you don't know who we are, we're a charity. We're very small. We've got currently, well, we were 2 people for a long time. We're now up to 6. And I'll tell you a little bit about us and how this is relevant to today's topic. This is a screenshot from our website. Please go look there, lots of resources there. We work across London with anyone who has an interest or ownership of publicly accessible green space. So it's primarily local authorities, but it also includes the Royal Parks, the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority, Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, and a growing number of independent park trusts. And we support and advise them in a number of ways. So our core objectives are to advise, advocate and promote. So in terms of the advice, we try to support the various managers and landowners about what can be considered as good practice across the services that they provide. When I first started, it was a matter of about, well, at least the 33 boroughs, all doing similar things, all different ways, and not talking to each other. And over the last 10, 15, bit longer years, we've managed to develop a network of those people so they actually collaborate, work together, talk to each other, learn from each other, and that they don't reinvent the wheel. In a similar way, I expect that you operate as well. You're all spread out in various places. Some of you are very isolated and don't get to meet other people, like-minded people. And today is a day when you can do that. It's great. And the thing is that without our input, things would be, I consider, would be a whole lot worse in London. So the advice we give is free. We're funded through voluntary contributions from the landowners, and we've been able to grow in size because we've managed to get a 2-year grant from the Greater London Authority, which is really good. In terms of the advocacy work that we do, we work at 3 levels, and that has changed over time. So at the top level, we try to work with politicians, the decision makers in local government, the people who are the portfolio holders for parks and open spaces, with a view to educate them about parks and open spaces. Often they're not from that background, and to support them in a really tough job that they have in that parks, public parks are not a statutory service, so they are considered discretionary, and so therefore they get lots and lots of cuts, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. And the other thing, so we work at that top level, then we work across London working with managers, owners of green spaces, and then until recently we were very involved in setting up and helping friends groups, so community groups, who are very, very passionate about their individual parks and open spaces. And they have now, over the years, grown so many. There were 200 when we were starting. There are now 800 to 900 friends groups across London, which is great. They've now formed their own network, the London Friends Group, London Green Spaces Friends Group Network. And so they've taken over doing a lot of that role. And in terms of promotion, that's something we've not been able to do much of, but now we have a communications officer who's helping us to do this. This is just a 12-year period. This graph shows the net expenditure of park budgets across the boroughs. And over the last 12 years, basically, 1/3 of their budget has been cut. And you can see it's not going up. It's not even levelling off. And so that is the background against which these services are seeking to be provided. The consequence of that is that we've seen is there's been a degrading in the quality of those spaces, and also in terms of the numbers of staff working on the ground. And whereas in the past people used to be site-based, like many of you are, a lot of the maintenance is now down to peripatetic teams moving from site to site. So the connections that the people managing those spaces are severed, and they don't have that sense of ownership that I expect a lot of you have with your sites that you manage. And because of the concern about the quality and the falling quality of green space, we do a number of things. I'm just going to tell you very quickly a few of them. One is that we've developed a green space quality manual, which is a pictorial guide with short descriptions that sits alongside a standard specification. And we developed that so that the public, councillors and professionals could refer to this when talking about the levels of quality, the 4 levels. And the top quality is the one we're striving to move towards. And the lowest quality is one where we're saying this needs intervention, this is not good enough. And we make this available to our supporters. It's you can look at it on our website. The other thing that we've done for the last 5 years is to develop an annual report where we look at 10 criteria across the 33 boroughs. In fact, 32. We don't look at City of London because it's untypical. And we measure how well they're doing on 10 criteria. Last year's one, we focused on parks and climate change. And this year, we're going to be focusing on clean parks, which sounds a bit bland, but it's, I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And it's been an incredibly powerful nudge tool to improve the quality of green spaces, but also to get the boroughs talking and working together. So from experience, we don't produce a paper copy anymore. It's all available online. You can see all of them. But we send these, or we used to send these to chief executives, leaders of the council, etc. Just to make them aware that they have parks in their boroughs and that they're important and that they need to be maintained and looked after. And now we produce just a 2-pager because they're very busy with hyperlinks. They can go and look at the full report. And what they have here is, I'll share the bigger picture of this in a minute, what has become known as a league table. It was never set up to be that, but that's what it's become in a good way. And it's all about promoting the good stuff, the success of what people are doing, and not about, oh, you know, the ones at the bottom are rubbish and all that. I'll say a bit more about that. And then what we produce for each borough is a bespoke feedback report based on how they've done during the year, and things that they do well, areas where they can improve. And I have usually it lasts about an hour's conversation with the heads of parks going through this, and it's really helpful because often they don't have this kind of feedback. And then looking at the table itself, I'm not going to go into details, but we've got the boroughs listed, how well they're doing. Last year we introduced a new category in terms of significant improvers on the past. Just to let you know, over the last 5 years, all the boroughs have been improving, and there's been a bit of, you know, argy-bargy of some moving around. Usually the top quartile have been about the same year on year, but it's a movable feast. And the thing to bear in mind is that it's a backward-looking benchmarking thing, and boroughs are in process of improving their services even as we are here. And so I know some of these boroughs are going to shoot up because where there's a white space, it's where they just don't have the documents. So I just rattle through the headings of the 10 criteria and reference the ones which are specifically relevant to today's topic. So we look at public satisfaction. Are they asking the public for feedback? Many boroughs don't. We look at awards for quality, collaboration, events, health, fitness and well-being. This is one where it's very relevant to today's session. And so under those headings are many sub-criteria. And under health, fitness and well-being, we're asking, are their parks being used for green social prescribing? We also ask, do they provide land within the parks for community food growing or other forms of community growing, orchards or the like? And they get points for doing those sorts of things. We don't include allotments in this because generally allotments aren't publicly accessible. They're locked off. But we're very keen to promote growing in parks by the public. And it is quite a challenge in terms of managing those areas, but it's something we've been promoting for a number of years. And we also ask under this about what they're doing to encourage social inclusion as well. So that's health, fitness and wellbeing. Supporting nature, community involvement is the other key one that's relevant today. And we ask for information about the numbers of friends groups they have, numbers of user groups, because it's not always, it could be a football club or such like. And we asked them how many hours volunteering and numbers of volunteering have been taking place. Then there's skills development, sustainability and strategic planning. So it's really thorough. So I won't labour that anymore. Another thing we've done to encourage boroughs to go pesticide free is to develop an integrated weed management guidance, which again is an interactive PDF, which can help them think through the design, management and maintenance of green spaces, with a view that herbicides are used as a last resort. Something else we're doing, so in terms of the pandemic, which you're considering today, the effects, clearly I think you all know that in the lockdowns, people were flocking to the parks and really enjoying them, which is great. The sad thing is they left a lot of their trash behind. And I mean, I haven't brought the photographs to show because they're depressing, but mountains of litter. It's just appalling. And it is a cultural thing in this country that for some reason people think there's always going to be someone who's going to be coming along afterwards to clear up the mess. But we estimate that in London alone, it's nearly £50 million a year is spent just on collecting and disposing of litter. Now that's a waste of money. And we'd rather see that money invested in the parks to make them better. So yesterday we launched a campaign about to encourage people to take their rubbish home. And we will continue to do that through the whole of this year. We'll do it year on year. Another thing we're doing is we set up a number of action groups to look at specific issues. And one that's quite fresh is looking at women's safety in parks, looking at how we can design, manage and support women to use parks more freely without having the fear of being attacked or whatever. And so there's a whole team that we're bringing together. We're seeking to have that led by women, and it's only just been set up. So we're setting up terms of reference. But one of the things we'll be looking at is some research about, you see the headlines about some atrocity happening to a woman in a park. And that for some reason, that hits the headlines. And it is awful. But we want to get some statistics to see actually comparing statistics of women who are attacked in parks versus elsewhere. And I'm pretty certain, that's why we need to do the research, that actually parks are a whole lot safer than many of our streets. But the press perpetuate this urban myth that's saying it's not safe for women to use their parks. And that's not the right message we should be giving out. So I'm not saying it's easy and everything is okay, but what we've got to do is reverse and actually get some truth telling going on here. And then, so I'm just coming to the end of my session. So one of the other things we're doing is looking at the impact of green spaces on health and well-being. And Hamida is leading on that. And I'm going to hand over to her to tell you all about it. Thank you.
So much. Quite nervous. This is my first time doing something like this. So what Tony says are with friends, I'm going to be fine. I've been working on this young people's mental health and green space project. Speaking of the title of it, it's snap it. You can give me, please do, because I am thinking about how to make that nice and snappy. But it is examining the views of young people, how they use parks, what they think about them, and how it impacts their mental health, and specifically looking at the social and cultural barriers that young people face in accessing green spaces. So I find this particularly interesting because we know loads about the physical barriers, so cost, weather, distance, all these things we know are barriers to accessing green spaces already. But I want to know more about the deeply held personal views and perceptions that affect people using green spaces and how this impacts their mental health. So the first part of this research was the Young Londoners Health Survey, which collected data on how young people use and think about parks. It ran for 6 weeks and we closed with 165 responses. And the survey was open to all young people in London, aged 16 to 25, and we picked this age group specifically because we know that this around age 16 is when young people start to use parks more independently, so not with friends, not with family, but with schools. So today I'm going to cover how young people responded to the survey, what they said are the barriers that they face, how it impacts their mental health, and how they use it, why they use it, and how we can get them to use it even more. So the first questions we asked was with who and how often they go, and I wanted to know this because the current research has already shown that more people are using their parks and green spaces as COVID-19, and we wanted to see if this was replicated in young people, and it was. You can see that most young people say that they use green spaces 2 to 3 times a week or every single day, and they go with family and they go with friends, but mostly that they go alone, and it has increased since COVID-19 specifically. Really interesting. Go to the next slide. That they go alone a lot more than they go with friends and family, and with that later as well. So the next group of questions asked young people why they go to parks, how they feel, and if spending time in parks is important for their mental health. And young people share that the main reasons they go to parks is to escape from life's day-to-day stresses, to relax, and because they find parks aesthetically pleasing. And the majority of young people said that they find parks extremely important for their mental health. And he's described feeling calm, connected to nature, energized, happy, and relaxed when they're in parks, which is brilliant to hear. And this is consistent with research. We already know that parks are invaluable to people's health, and we're seeing here it's invaluable to their mental health as well. So the final group of questions asked about what factors prevented young people from visiting parks, and as expected, most people said that the barriers were distance and the weather.
Next one.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. One more time. Yes. But you can see that some interesting other topics are coming up. So they don't have the energy, too busy at work and school. And the recurring theme I was hearing is we really want to go to parks. It's just that we can't because we're too busy and with all these other responsibilities, which is actually quite sad. And so we have to figure out ways we can go around that and encourage young people to go at different times perhaps. Other specific reasons that they said were we don't want to go to parks because of poor lighting, if you go to the next slide, poor quality, I don't feel safe, I don't feel confident, I don't want to go by myself. And so that you can see that there's a need there, but that we need to think about creative ways of getting young people to use the spaces already there and to improve the quality, especially if litter and dog waste are huge barriers. So how can we promote parks more positively and increase young people's confidence when using parks? What can we do to address the safety concerns that they have? And how can we provide a place for both socialising and re-energising because they're using it for both reasons? So, and I think I'm going to find a lot more information in the next part of my research. So I'm going to be doing interviews with young people, groups of young people in the next few months, and we're going to be asking questions about digging deeper into everything we find out here, but also co-designing solutions with them. So what do they think we should be doing? And developing case studies and best practices of what they think is the best standard for parks and what we should be doing. And then, so my final thoughts are that this research was funded by the GLA, which is really helpful for me because I have access to all their previous research and current research, not just in green space use, but also mental health and other things. And we have access and links to all of their networks and people who are bringing fantastic insight to different questions we can be asking. So we're working with the culture team, environment team, mental health team, youth team, peer outreach workers. So all these different people have inputted into the research. And I think what's been most helpful is actually going to the peer outreach workers, which is a group of young people paid by the GLA, and they were like going through the questions and they suggested, okay, don't ask this question, change this question here, and having that young person's perspective on the questions we should be asking was really valuable for me. And also they've been able to push the research across their networks so we can share it with even more people, and hopefully we can do that as well when the report launches later this year. But I did want to mention that 165 responses to a survey is only a snapshot of what young people think, and we want to really dig into how we can engage young people even more, and clearly surveys are not the best way to engage young people, so I think there's already a huge interest in the interviews, and when you say to young people, what do you think, you've got a stake in this, come to the table and build the solutions, there's a lot more interest in actually donating their time, and we're paying them as well. So I think the model is youth forums, bringing them into the room where the decisions are being made, and actually giving them the platform to say, okay, this is what we came up with, and then to see it in practice as well, which is just going to be awesome. That's the goal for me. And I feel like I did brush through that, I apologise. But what I covered today was only the preliminary analysis of the survey responses, and also the final part of the research I still haven't started. But I am really excited to see what solutions young people come up with, and to share the final report with you all in October when it launches. Yeah, that's it from me.
Tony, Hamida, that was amazing. Very
You want to
informative.
sit down with questions?
We're going to do questions now. Yeah, so if there are any questions for the audience, we need to pass the microphone to people so they'll hear online when we record it. Yeah.
It's a question from Hamida. I may have missed it, in which case my apologies, but what was your definition of young people?
Young people, so 16 to 25, so I'm 24, so I'm just running the mix there. And you mentioned that we picked 16 because we thought that's when people start to go to parks by themselves for leisure, for the club, whatever reason.
Did any of them mention free Wi-Fi?
Actually, we asked, and it was one of the most popular reasons. So they having access to Wi-Fi, stick service, phone calls, none of that was important to them. They just wanted it to be beautiful, for them to be able to have events, but also have a low time.
Right, which is quite a surprise to me. I was expecting that to come up high, but things like wanting shelters, so for bad weather, and also somewhere to store their kit, so like lockers. So some really interesting things come.
That is really interesting. This a question I was going to ask actually was about engagement with the green space, and are people actually engaging with the environment, or are they kind of on their phone walking around? Because there are different levels. Have you had anything feedback?
I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I think when we'll ask that in the next portion, but I think they are using it to look at what's around and to connect with nature and to feel calm. So yeah, and especially if Wi-Fi and cell service is not important, then I'm assuming that they're not really wanting to use their devices.
Yeah, yeah.
And on the topic of Wi-Fi, we have brought this up in the past on the topic of public safety, because some parks there's no signal, and we've argued the case that actually if we could improve the reception within parks and green spaces, then people who do feel vulnerable might feel safer. So that is another area of interest and research. So.
Yeah.
Thank you both for the I work at Just Gas, project volunteer workforce there. We've got over 260 volunteers, but we're really keen to broaden the age diversity and I suppose my question primarily to the leader is what the research done. What advice would you have for us about, due reach out and
Great question that I didn't really answer, but I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to say having ownership of specific spaces. So, you know, there's loads of young people that use our parks, but sometimes when you go into the park, you can very clearly see the children's play area, and then there's just like nothing else. And so having specific designated areas for young people to do different things. So, you know, mindfulness time if they want to be learned, but also activities, having spaces open at later times or earlier perhaps, or specific activities with groups of people, you know, events and activities that are tailored to the community that they want to go to. I think those are all important things. But ownership is like the key thing, having their thing that they need to do and that they've got stake in.
And I just don't think what I found fascinating about the results we had was I know that for adults, a reason why, given why they don't use their parks is they're too busy, they don't have spare time. But actually, the same answers were coming up from the young people. You know, they've got schoolwork, they're just too busy, and I was shocked by that. So we're going to try and delve into that a bit more. So. Back to the thing about volunteers, most people who are volunteering in our parks are people who are time rich, and it's reaching people who are time poor and getting them engaged, which is the challenge. And we have tried in the past through our friends group network to encourage young people to get involved, and in Suffolk a few years ago they set up a young friends group in Suffolk Park, and it was incredibly successful and just amazing. But the funding for that kind of work, because you need to do outreach really, to go out, welcome them and interact with them, that's all gone. The staff to do that, the rangers and all that, you know, that graph I showed you, that's the consequence. So the challenge is, you know, in local authority run spaces, that's a real challenge. I think for many of you, where you're in smaller spaces, there is funding out there through grants and all that you might be able to help get some money in to pay somebody to try and do that work. But it is a tough call, but it's great you're trying to do it.
Final thought actually is go to where people are. So go in schools, if they're in colleges, if they're in schools, but go where they are. And when I was younger, I didn't even know that I could be a park ranger or working parks or working green space. So that education of what we can be doing with parks and green spaces is actually really important as well. So knowing that is available for them to even go to is especially in that community.
Right. Yeah, it's a really important point. I think the representation is super important. We need to make sure these green spaces are inclusive and they do. Tony, have you got any names off the top of your head of organisations for funding?
Well, there's the lottery. There's a community fund. I think it's pretty easy to get up to £10,000, which in some cases isn't a lot of money. But that's one it doesn't have too many hurdles to get through that comes to mind. But there are many charities, and we send out updates, and they go into the Friends Group Network newsletter. I can forward details for people to sign up to that. So we publicise. Well, if you go to our website and look at funding opportunities, you'll see that. Yes, it's amazing.
It's sort of really interesting. Like at Chiswick House and Palace, we are also trying to engage more young people, and we've set up a project called Get Inspired with which is a private donor to help us do this. But I just like to ask you, how did you engage with young people to do the survey, and sort of where the young people from?
So we're across London and we share it across our network. So Parks for London links, we've got all the service users that we have, but also working with the GA, that's been really helpful. And we were able to pass it along their network. So they work with loads of youth groups and charities that work with young people, and they have a peer outreach team as well. So there's a group of young people very interested in policies and decision making, and yeah, that's how it sort of grew. And we put it in loads of different newsletters as well. But it was challenging. It was definitely a learning curve for us because we thought, oh, we'll get easy peasy, we'll get loads of people filling it out. But I think it's consistently, we've seen, you know, unless you're paying a huge sum of money, you're not going to get engagement on a survey. Yeah. So I think the way forward is going and establishing a youth group, or a youth forum, or a youth advisory board, where they have a stake in the solution, they have longevity across the project.
So I keep on adding things. Think of other things. I think what this has taught us, because we've out of the population, potential population across London, we had 165 responses, so it's pretty poor. And one could argue it's not, you know, you have to be careful what we do with the results, but it's reframed our thinking that young people are not necessarily hard to reach, they're hard to engage. And it's finding the right level and the right medium with which we can engage with them. So yes, yes, absolutely. So yeah, that is where we're going to try and draw them in for the actual interviews, where we'll do some focus groups, and we have a budget for that, but most people don't have that. So
did you pay them?
not for the survey.
So that's what I learned in the survey, because we didn't get them, the engagement was poor. And I think the interviews, we've received huge numbers of people saying they want to take part because it's paid and they're able to see, you know, and they're able to answer questions and provide their experience and give case studies, all these things I think are really important.
Great, thank you. Another question here?
Hi, Jonathan. Are you talking about the 10 grand being a fairly easy grant to get? I'm assuming that's easy to get from capital.
No, it's the community. Oh, I wish I knew the name. It's the community fund, and it's specially set up for community groups. So it's not for capital. You can do all kinds.
If you get the money to pay more people to more care, more places. So I mean, you can't usually get any money to actually employ more people to take care of more places. I'm assuming
No.
So that could be just funded then, and maybe the same grant could be used to pay young people to respond to surveys. Well, that could be another way to use the money better. Feels like there's too much money always for capital projects. Never enough money invested. Sorry, that was kind of a question. I ended up with a minor rant.
No, I'll join the rant. Because that's the problem. There's no, well, I wouldn't say no shortage of capital funding. It's the revenue. That's the killer.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah, very good question.
Thanks, Ashley. Obviously, one of the major hurdles is the weather that seems to stop people. Well, we have no control over that. So how can we reconcile a change of attitude to how space should be used?
Two things I think is providing shelter and gazebos, cafes, whatever we can do to sort of let people go in and escape the rain. But I think another thing that kept on coming up was I don't know what to do. Like if it's raining, I think we should be encouraging people to put on their rains and do activities in the rain and get sort of in the dirt and really use the space. And so encouragement in that aspect.
In a way, I think this is actually a more fundamental thing than that. I think that I'm of a generation where, as kids, you know, we were allowed to be out until the streetlights came on. We learned to entertain ourselves by getting up to all sorts of mischief. Children aren't allowed to do that now, so presumably young adults also don't engage with their environment in the way that people would have done 40 years ago. So in a way, we need to start earlier with letting children get dirty, get wet, explore the world around them. They then may become young adult park users, because putting on a rain mat or a fleece or something, you know, it's invigorating. So it sort of needs to almost start earlier than the 16 and 25-year-olds.
Totally agree, and it starts at kindergarten level. And so one of the things we asked on the Good Parks for London survey is, are you providing spaces for forest schools?
Yeah, exactly.
And that type of activity.
Yeah.
So, and that is increasing year on year. People are waking up to it, but it's often, it's a section of the community that's doing it. It's more the well-off people who are doing it, and it's more like, and you know, it's basic for, you know, for poorer families. Buying a pair of wellies and waterproofs is a big issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's the outlay, because this stuff isn't cheap. It's also where you store it in your home, and if it's only used once a year, people aren't going to do that. So maybe, as like Field Studies Council at their premises, they have, you know, rows and rows of kit that you can just go and borrow and wear. Maybe we should start introducing that in our parks and open spaces. You know, that to help people overcome that. But the other thing about this provision of shelters, it's fascinating, because when I started in local authority parks, they were ripping out shelters because, oh, that's where all the youth gather. And youth gathering, you know, they're a problem. They're going to vandalise things and cause problems. I mean, it's mad. And so we need to re-educate, you know, the wider public, because you know, other people using the park. You even get it on street. You know, young people like to socialise. They like to get into small groups, but the perception by other people is, oh, they're causing trouble. They're lingering. They're loitering. They're up to no good. They're plotting. I'm not safe, and that's just not true. They need to do that to grow as adults, to socialise and that. So our spaces, we need to provide those spaces where people can interact. And I think that's a whole opportunity for landscape architects and the managers to get their heads together and work on. Yes. Yes.
Always think of this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the thing about weather is quite interesting. And I was thinking it would be really interesting to see certain same questions asked in other countries where it's like two parts. You do find this across the country, but training and find shelters, trees, the side shade. So yeah,
Even things like benches as well.
Yeah. And yeah, the fact you mentioned about for and socialising groups, because this is world is now a lot of social media, so it's
If I heard you correctly, for groups that don't have charitable status and constitutions. Yeah, good question. So lots of friends groups, community groups, you know, they often set up in opposition against something that's proposed in a park, and they want to save it, whatever. And so they start as a group of like-minded people, and often they grow, and the membership grows, but they do great stuff, and they can do lots of great stuff. The issue is, if they form and get constituted, and then they don't have to become a charity, but if they get constituted, then their opportunities for getting funding are much greater, because a funder generally won't give money unless you're constituted, because it's a risk. So it's worth doing. There are charities out there that help you in that process, and we've always encouraged friends groups to go down that route when they get to that stage of size and ability. I mean, some friends groups, for example, in Battersea Park, they are incredible fundraisers, and you know, they're able to access funding that local authorities can't access. So it's not to be sniffed at. Having said that, the Friends Group network is unconstituted. And I'm trying to persuade them to become constituted in order that they can get more money. It's an ongoing, it's back to the thing about volunteers. Most Friends groups are white, middle class, retired people. They are, and you know, it's a dilemma. But if we didn't have those, there'd be nothing. And they are waking up to the fact that they're not represented, and they too are trying to reach out. So there is progress. It's painfully slow. But it's this tension. I mean, there's also this whole issue about safeguarding. So when you're dealing with young people, that puts a lot of people off. You know, oh, we can't. You know, we need to be careful here because of all the regulations around safeguarding. So that's another thing.
I don't know much about this, but I think working in partnerships with organisations don't have to have these days. So whenever I was to work with the day, the focus was empowerment and getting people to access health services, right? But green spaces are known to have these health services, plus mental health, etc. And so maybe going to people and saying, I have this idea, can we use your space? Can you give us some money? Or can we collaborate in some way to create a project that can do what it is that you're looking for? Yeah.
It's a really good step, yeah. Because they have those specialisms, they have those experiences, and they have those connections. So yeah, do stuff in collaboration. We as a charity do everything through collaboration with our organisations. So yeah.
Question. Is there any more questions?
Hello, I almost didn't answer the question because I might overlap with some other people, but just when you were giving your talk, say well-being, can I ask how you measure that and why you don't separate that out separately?
It's a tricky one because it's hard. It kind of goes across several of the 10 criteria, and for the purposes of our exercise, we just plonked it there, so to speak. It's not the best place, I agree. How we measure it is where we ask them to give evidence, and it's usually around policies and actions, and where some don't even have a policy about it, so they get nothing. But we also want to see, you know, having a policy is one step, but actually delivering on it is the next, and that's the one we really look at. And they give us examples of where they've been doing activities, and that's what we look at. And the thing about those criteria, the headings will remain the same. We tweak them each year, and as I said, it acts like a nudge tool. So the other thing that we forgot to say was around skills. We ask about EDI and skills development and employing a diverse workforce. And so we pick it up there as well. In fact, our last heads of service meeting, no, it was our annual survey that we've just completed in January. Heads of service, the top 3 things, one of them was we want to develop a more diverse workforce. That was them, that was the leader saying, which is really good. And it's just came out, yes, oh no, yes, I can announce it, sorry. There's different things going on with, some things are embargoed, but we're working with Groundwork on a whole green space skills hub to set it up. And that's one of the ambitions, is to encourage and develop a more diverse workforce. So that's over a 2-year period within that. So, sorry, rambling answer to your question, sorry.
Okay, great. Those are some really good questions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to you both, Tony and Hamida. So thank you so much for your talk. It was very informative. Thank you. Great, so now we have a tea break with some cake, which we're really excited to hear. So we are reconvening at 12:15, is that right? Yeah, 11:15. So we go out to the refreshment area.
Very sorry. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I wasn't regarding. Yes, but you've got excellent projects. I'm a project. Yeah, a sort of seminar. Yes.